In the dense, untamed forests of Scandinavia, where the ancient trees stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time, my friend Henry and I embarked on a journey that would forever change our lives. It was late autumn, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. The forest, shrouded in mist and shadow, exuded an eerie beauty that was both enchanting and unsettling. Henry and I had always shared a love for the outdoors, and this trip was meant to be an escape from our daily routines, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. We had planned our route meticulously, intending to hike through the heart of the forest and camp under the stars. Little did we know that our adventure would lead us into a nightmare from which we would barely escape. The first few days of our journey were idyllic. We trekked through the forest, marveling at the towering pines and the golden carpet of fallen leaves that crunched underfoot. The air was filled with the earthy scent of moss and the distant calls of wildlife. At night, we sat by our campfire, sharing stories and laughing, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows around us. On the third day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided to set up camp near a small clearing. The light was fading fast, and the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees forming an impenetrable wall of darkness. We gathered wood for the fire, hoping its warmth and light would ward off the encroaching chill. As we sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the sense of camaraderie, we heard a rustling in the underbrush. At first, we dismissed it as the wind or a small animal, but the sound grew closer and more distinct. Henry and I exchanged uneasy glances, our earlier bravado giving way to a creeping sense of unease. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light of our campfire. He was a tall man, clad in a weathered coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He carried a walking stick, and his eyes glinted with an unsettling intensity. The man introduced himself as Lars, the forester of these parts. He claimed to be checking on travelers and offered to join us by the fire. His presence, though initially unsettling, seemed to provide a sense of security. We welcomed him, thinking it would be good to have someone knowledgeable about the forest with us. Lars began to share stories about the forest, tales of old legends and strange occurrences. His voice was rough and gravelly, drawing us in despite the unease that still lingered. He spoke of ancient spirits and mysterious disappearances, of eerie lights and the whispers of the trees. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the tales he wove. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something predatory in Lars's gaze. His eyes never seemed to leave us, watching with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Henry seemed oblivious to the growing tension, caught up in the tales and the warmth of the fire. As we prepared to turn in for the night, Lars offered to keep watch, claiming he was accustomed to the forest's nocturnal rhythms. Relieved, we agreed, trusting his experience. I fell asleep quickly, the events of the day and the soothing crackle of the fire lulling me into slumber. I awoke in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a soft murmuring that seemed to come from all around us. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dim glow over the campsite. I looked around and saw Lars standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the darkness. His posture was rigid, and there was an unsettling stillness about him. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. I nudged Henry awake, whispering that we should leave. Henry, groggy and confused, reluctantly agreed. We began to quietly pack our things, trying not to attract Lars's attention. As we did, I glanced at him again and saw him watching us, a slow smile spreading across his face. We hastily finished packing and started to move away from the camp. Lars made no attempt to stop us, but his eyes followed us, and I felt a growing sense of dread. We moved deeper into the forest, hoping to put as much distance between us and Lars as possible. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us, the trees forming an impenetrable wall of darkness. The path we had followed earlier was now barely visible, obscured by shadows and mist. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. We walked for what felt like hours, the forest growing denser and more foreboding with each step. The trees seemed to lean in towards us, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground was uneven and treacherous, and we stumbled often, our progress slow and laborious. Suddenly, we heard a sound behind us, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. Slowly, we turned around, and in the dim light, we saw Lars standing a few feet away, his eyes glinting with malice. panic surged through us, and we broke into a run, desperately trying to escape. The forest was a labyrinth, and we quickly lost our way, the trees and shadows all blending together. The sound of Lars's footsteps grew closer, relentless in their pursuit. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead, but no matter how fast we went, Lars seemed to be right behind us. The forest was alive with eerie noises, the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures adding to our terror. Finally, we stumbled upon a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines and underbrush. We ducked inside, hoping to find a place to hide and catch our breath. The cave was dark and damp, the air heavy with the scent of moss and earth. We huddled together, listening intently for any sign of Lars. Minutes passed, and the forest grew quiet. The only sound was the ragged rhythm of our breathing and the distant drip of water from the cave ceiling. We dared to hope that we had lost him, that we were safe, at least for the moment. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the entrance of the cave. Lars stood there, his face twisted into a grotesque grin. He stepped inside, blocking our only exit. The cave felt smaller, the walls closing in around us, suffocating us with fear. Desperation took hold, and we scrambled to find a way out. Our hands searched the rough walls of the cave, feeling for any hidden passage or escape route. In the dim light, we found a narrow tunnel at the back of the cave, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. With no other option, we crawled into the tunnel, the walls pressing in on us from all sides. The air was stale and suffocating, and every inch forward felt like a monumental effort. Behind us, we could hear Lars's laughter, a chilling sound that echoed through the narrow space. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the earth. Our hands and knees were scraped raw from the rough stone, and our muscles ached from the effort, but we pressed on, driven by the primal instinct to survive. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a larger cavern illuminated by a faint, otherworldly light. The cavern was vast, its walls covered in strange, luminescent fungi that cast an eerie glow. In the center of the cavern stood a stone altar, covered in ancient runes and surrounded by a circle of bones. We hesitated, unsure of what we had stumbled upon. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the faint whispers of unseen entities seemed to echo through the cavern. But we had no time to ponder the mysteries of this place. Lars was still behind us, and we needed to find a way out. We moved quickly, searching the cavern for any sign of an exit. The walls were smooth and unyielding, offering no clues. Our desperation grew with each passing moment, the weight of our predicament pressing down on us like a physical force. Then we saw a narrow fissure in the far wall of the cavern, barely visible in the dim light. It was our only hope. We hurried towards it, squeezing through the tight space and emerging into another tunnel. This one was wider, with a faint breeze that suggested an opening somewhere ahead. We moved as quickly as we could, our fear and exhaustion driving us forward. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the darkness. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. Finally, we saw a faint light ahead, the promise of freedom. We pushed ourselves to the limit, our hearts pounding with anticipation. The tunnel opened up into a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of dawn. We stumbled out, gasping for air and collapsing onto the forest floor. We lay there for a moment, the relief of our escape washing over us. The forest was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. We had made it. We were safe. As we caught our breath and gathered our strength, we realized that the forest around us was unfamiliar. We had no idea where we were or how far we had traveled. But we were alive, and that was all that mattered. And we stood up, looking around for any sign of a path or a landmark. The forest seemed less menacing in the light of day, but the memory of our ordeal was still fresh in our minds. We needed to find our way back to civilization, to safety. With the sun rising behind us, we began to walk, hoping to find a way out of the forest. The trees, once ominous and foreboding, now seemed like silent guardians, watching over us as we made our way through the underbrush. We walked for hours, our bodies weary but our spirits buoyed by the promise of freedom. The forest gradually began to thin, and we saw signs of human activity: a broken fence, a discarded piece of machinery. We were getting closer. Finally, we emerged from the forest onto a dirt road, a lifeline that would lead us back to safety. We followed it, our steps unsteady but determined. The road wound through the countryside, eventually leading us to a small village nestled in a valley. The villagers welcomed us with open arms, offering food and shelter. They listened to our story with wide-eyed disbelief, their expressions a mix of horror and sympathy. We were safe at last, but the memory of our encounter with Lars would haunt us forever. As we sat by the fire that evening, surrounded by the warmth and comfort of the village, I couldn't help but think of the forest and its secrets. It was a place of untamed beauty and unfathomable danger, a place where the line between reality and nightmare was blurred. And though we had escaped, a part of me knew that the forest would always be with us, a dark and haunting presence that we could never fully escape.